This story didn't happen to me, but the person I heard it from swears up and down that it is true, and his wife backs him up on it. They even tell it the same way every time someone asks about it, drunk or sober. Either they're both better actors than I ever gave them credit for, or their story has more to it than seems possible. Anyway, the friends in question are Jake and Sarah. I met them in college shortly after they'd gotten together. He was a biology major with aspirations of studying the ecology of the Appalachian region, and she was a business student who had just happened to have fallen in love with rock climbing and wilderness survival as a hobby just a few weeks before they met. Despite how cliquey the two schools they belonged to tended to be, the two of them hit it off really well and took to running off into the woods of God knows where every weekend they could, or during holiday breaks. Sarah would later tell me that it was a combination of the wonder in Jake's eyes when he found a particularly interesting lichen or insect, and the way he didn't act as much like a party-obsessed jerk like the other guys in business school tended to, which first got her interest. I guess it makes sense. I went to some of the parties those guys threw, and I can tell you without a doubt that those are the kind of guys who gave parents of girls like Sarah nightmares when they ran off to school. As for Jake, well, he was just glad to have someone with whom to share his fascination with life and the wild. The two of them made it to a point to never visit the same trail or campground or national park twice if they could avoid it. They used to say that half the point was the adventure of the experience. Although I suspect the reasoning came from Sarah. Jake would have been happy marvelling at the same trees over and over again if he were allowed, but he never seemed bothered by Sarah's more intrepid tastes. By the end of their first year together, they had run out of nearby parks and trails to explore, so they were forced to travel a bit farther from the school to keep things interesting. In the summer of 2009, Sarah found a small park in West Virginia in the northeast corner of Greenville County. She'd never heard of the park before, but after a bit of searching, she found hikers and campus forums with threads and discussions about the place. Evidently, most people who'd gone there found it less than enjoyable. Something about the wildlife being a bit strange. Still, it was closer than anything else they'd been able to find in weeks of searching. And entry wasn't expensive at all. Next chance they got, they disappeared with all their hiking gear and a note from Jake left on the door of his dorm. Sorry about the dishes, I know it was my turn tonight. I'll make up to you when we get back. Looking at a map, Summit Miss is easy enough to find. Top right corner of Greenbrier County, southeast of Summit Lake. And then you find the little tree on the shield, the little tree on a shield marker which denotes a national park on these things we used to use to find our way around what we call maps. Jake and Sarah had left at about 5 in the morning, which meant they should have arrived at their destination by around 8 when Summit Miss would open. However, having both grown up in big cities, neither of them were accustomed to navigating the rural areas of Appalachia. They took so many wrong turns and traced back their routes so many times that by the time they arrived at Summit Miss, frustrated and itching to stretch their legs, it was already 5 o'clock in the afternoon. According to the smiling old man at the entrance and the signer attached to his little guard post, they had little time left. It was only 3 hours to wander through the trails before the park would close, and they would be forced to pack up and head back home. Still, neither of them were willing to give up after so much driving and frustration, so they paid their entry fee and quickly found a place to park. Most of the visitors that day were already packing up and heading out. Only Sarah and Jake were checking their packs and equipment for the journey in, rather than the journey home. The woods of West Virginia are more tangled in the summer than you might think. It's no rainforest, of course, but it's not a desolate mountaintop either. This was the height of the greenest season in the area, with huge bushes covering the spaces between towering trees which themselves were riddled with vines. Spiders in their webs peppered the floor and connected tree trunk to tree trunk like police tape. The tails of deer flashed white as they ran into bush at the first sound of human footsteps. Rabbits and squirrels ran into the hole and up into the trees. Jake and Sarah were whipping their heads around so much, trying to take it all at once with their excitement. that they hardly paid any attention to where they were going as they moved deeper and deeper into the woods. They spent so long just walking, looking, and laughing that it wasn't until sundown that they noticed the path was gone, and still they just laughed. Years of experience between them, this kind of thing no longer worried them. They knew how to find a trail, and how to keep a cool head. Only a few minutes with the compass and map, they returned back towards the campgrounds, step after confident step leading them home. Of course, they were heading in a straight line now to save time. So the path they were taking was different than the one they'd come by, and it showed. This part of the woods was so vacant. The further they walked, the less, well, woods they saw. There weren't any more spider webs to gently peel away with a stick, or deers darting into the distance. After a while, even the crickets and birds fell silent. The air was still vacant, even with the wind the two had expected as the elevation. The trees started changing too. As they walked, the branches above them became more and more bare, their leaves fallen so long ago that the forest floor no longer crunched beneath their pairs' boots. The leaves simply bent, or crumbled silently into dust to rejoin the earth. The forest was getting sparse as well. The spaces between the towering, grey, skeletal trees grew wider and wider. Jake said something about how he was amazed that most of these trees were still standing, given how long dead they were, and how parched the mountain soil was between their roots. There was no way they'd gone the right way, map and compass be damned. Nothing about the park had looked anything like this. Still, confident in their navigation, they kept their spirits up for a little longer, until something crossed the path ahead of them. It was just a moth. And Sarah was the first to laugh softly at how they'd been startled by such a harmless thing. It seemed to be glowing in the growing moonlight, reflecting from its stark white wings. Jake smiled too, but just as they were about to turn to each other and laugh, they both noticed something off about the insect. Its wings weren't moving. It was gone before either of them could take a better look, but then Sarah and Jake were convinced that their nerves were just getting the better of them. After another 3 or 4 steps on the way, the optimism of the last hour started to come back to them, and the moonlight casting the grey world around them almost seemed magical, and again, instead of oppressive and dead. It only lasted for a few minutes, because soon they spotted a second moth, and then a third, and a fourth. The ghostly guiding insects gathered on the path until it seemed like they were following the pair, or leading them. The forest grew thinner and thinner still, while the bugs grew in number, and Jake and Sarah's shame at the mutual urge to clutch at each other seemed less ridiculous than the forest just stopped. In front of them was a wide, clear patch of earth, in what seemed like a perfect circle. No grass, no weeds, not even any fallen trees or branches. Only the same patchy carpet of grey and disintegrating leaves covered the cone dry earth in the clearing. Except from in the centre, a circle of dead earth maybe 8 feet wide lay in the middle of the clearing, completely bare and with hundreds of gliding, frozen moths flying around it. They all moved in the same direction, clockwise around the dead circle, getting closer and closer together until their wings must have been grazing over each other at the centre rim. Still, they never passed over that line, always staying a few feet off the ground and outside that dead spot. Something was forbidding about that spot. It wasn't just that they felt like they shouldn't go near it, like a no trespassing sign or something as mundane as that. It was more like the feeling you got when passing a house with a strange dog in the yard, barking and snarling without a leash or tether, or which looked as if it might be abused or neglected. That spot had something threatening about it, and unpredictable. But neither of them knew what the threat could be, or if it was even real. All they could think to do was move around the edge of the clearing, get to the other side, and keep going towards the park. Choosing a landmark on the other side of the clearing, a tree, with a stunted, desiccated branch about a foot off the ground, they moved in the same direction as the moths, those dead little wings still brushing their arms or their faces as they went both, keeping their backs to the trees at the edge of the clearing, their eyes on the spot as they went to the threatening presence of something that grew in their minds. It was as if an icy hand had thrust itself into their backs and taken a vice grip on their spines, pulling them back towards the tree. Its cold touch seemed to leach their warmth from their bodies, spreading to their shoulders and their legs. Its grip getting tighter and tighter with every step, but the time they were halfway to the other side, both were visibly wincing in discomfort. And Jake would later tell me that he never really understood how powerful imagined pain could be. Still, he never looked or sounded like he believed it was definitely all in his head. Finally, they made it to the landmark on the other side of the other side of the clearing, backed into the trees, turned and started walking. The icy hand released their grip, and panting and sweating, Jake and Sarah resumed their course. Before long, the moths were gone, and one by one, signs of life started to reappear in the woods. The squeaking of bats in the air, the whine of mosquitoes, bushes, vines, and leaves. Spiderwebs crossing the path. Spiderwebs crossing the path. They were actually grateful to feel the thick webs hit their face and to hear them snap as they pulled past their terror of stress tolerance. When they finally got back to the park, a ranger was writing them a ticket to leave on their windshield. Neither of them cared, and they weren't about to argue. Both of them were too happy to be out of those woods to be worried about a parking ticket. And besides, who would they believe their excuse they would argue about it? On the way out, while the ranger held the gate for them, Sarah rolled down the driver's window and asked, "Hey, I'm sorry if this is a weird question, but has anyone ever reported anything weird in the woods around here?" The ranger shrugged and shook his head, chuckling a little bit under his breath. "Well, not recently. At least I haven't said anything to me. There used to be stories back when the place was mapped out and set up as a park, and some even before that. What was the old one? Oh!" He looked back down at Sarah, leaning on the roof of the car and lowering his voice. "The folks who tried settling this area, way back when America was still getting together, started disappearing in these woods. Their religious leader said it was the spirits of the natives used to worship, taking white folk away as revenge for running out the folks who used to treat them with respect." He shook his head. "Between you and me, I don't buy into any of that stuff. I ain't never seen anything weird in these woods, you know. You'll better get out going. Have a safe trip." Jake and Sarah didn't buy the ranger's story either, and I agree with them when they said it sounds like something made up by white folk who don't bother to understand another culture enough to avoid demonizing their spirituality. But I do believe them when they say something wasn't right about that clearing near Summit Miss. It may not have been a white man's retelling of a vengeful spirit, but whatever it was, it wasn't something either of them wanted to see ever again.